We're back talking finance today. Our finance guy, Gavin Martin, the founder of Cornerstone Wealth, is back with us, and we're looking to get a snapshot of what 2014 might look like for the year ahead. Gavin Martin, welcome back to 2020.
Oh, g'day Neil, great to be with you.
Gavin, it is really, isn't it, speculation when you start to talk about what the coming year might look like. But I guess for anyone who's got some sort of idea about investment, or you're looking at your own personal finances and wondering what sort of directions and decisions to make, having some sort of good idea might be an important thing.
Yes, it is important to think about what the future's going to hold, and in particular your own personal circumstances. So whilst we might talk about what the economists, important bodies around the world, where they think the economy is going in the next year or beyond, it's important to focus on what you can control. So think through, as we're talking about these things that are happening around the world, don't get overly concerned about those things of which you've got no control over, but think about how you can actually conduct your personal finances to weather the storms, whether they be, challenging circumstances or whether they be times of more prosperity.
Well, it would appear that there are some big storms on the horizon when you look at the US, and Europe's not out of the woods by any means. But there is a sense, isn't there, that if you're an optimistic person, you'll always look for optimistic outcomes for what the year ahead might look like. And on the other hand, if you're a very pessimistic person, you're probably looking for the negatives all the time. How do you really discern in all of that? And given that we've got our own personal psychological makeup to deal with as well, how do we actually make sense of what might be an accurate and balanced way of looking at the future?
Yeah, it is important to take a broad look at the future, I guess, because what you'll find, there's the bulls who think that the economy is going to go gangbusters and there's going to be a fantastic opportunity to make lots of money, and then there's the bears who think that the sky's going to fall in and it's all going to go pear-shaped. And generally it's somewhere between the two. But what happens is that all the bulls all read information about the bulls because that's what they like, and they read information about how the economy is going to take off, or this sector or country is going to do really well. And all the bears, the people that think that the economy is not going to go well, all they read is that content. So we need to make sure that we take a balanced approach and don't just look at, say, one view that aligns with our particular view, and so that we get a more balanced view about what might happen in the future, and therefore how we can structure our own situation.
Now, it's all very complicated, but we're taking our personal finances into account, and then you've got the national finances for Australia. And you've got the big economies around the world. We talked about the US and Europe, but there's also China in the mix there. How do we actually look at what might happen in the 2014 year ahead when it comes to those global economies and how it affects us personally?
Yes, so if we do a quick snapshot of what's happening around the world, so if we look at the US, who have just gone through an issue of the debt ceiling and the government shutdown, that issue might pop up again in February, possibly a little bit later if they're able to do some accounting manoeuvres to avoid having to deal with that debt ceiling issue in February. But it's going to happen again in the future because the level of debt is increasing more than their economy is increasing. So they used to have as much debt, about $16 trillion in debt, and they had about $16 trillion in economic activity. Now that's starting to increase, so the debt is increasing over the 16 trillion, going over to the 17 trillion, but the economy is not keeping up with it. So it's a real problem for the US. They've turned the tap on, so the stimulus tap on, but it's very hard to turn it off. And so their main issue is that level of debt and trying to, at some point in time, reduce the level of government debt. Japan's the same. They're trying to stimulate their economy this time. They've taken very much austerity measures in the past, but they've got twice the amount of debt to GDP or economic activity. So they're in a worse position to the US, but trying to grow their way out or stimulate the economy this time round. Europe's a slow road to recovery. Their austerity measures have caused their growth to taper right off and be negative, actually. I think a lot of Europe has been in the red, but hopefully throughout 2014 they'll get back to positive. And then China's the big one, as you mentioned before, that if they can continue their growth, that will help the rest of the world's economy, but it's questionable as to whether they can maintain the level of growth they have done in the past.
And Gavin, when we look at these big economies around the world and the Australian economy, which is so much smaller than when we talk about the US and Europe and indeed China, when China now has issues, whether things are going strong or whether things are weakening, that seems to affect us more in Australia here than some of these other economies.
Yes, it does. Because we're so reliant on exporting, particularly a lot of our mining resources to China, we're significantly impacted by the level of growth there. So we are very much reliant on China, and whilst the whole catchphrase of when the US sneezes, Australia catches a cold, we are very much still aligned to the US, but becoming increasingly more reliant on business with China as well.
And if we were looking at Australia in the big picture, will we be immune when rough roads are ahead for some of these big economies? And how does that affect the way we are optimistic about whether we spend on various personal items here in Australia? I mean, I know there's a lot of things in the middle there that affect that.
One of the fascinating things about the Australian situation at the moment is that we are, I think, if not the wealthiest per capita nation in the world, we're close to that. But we're also the most negative at the moment as well. We're in such a negative frame of mind, even though we are one of the most prosperous nations. So it's a really interesting time for the Australian economy and I guess the individual psyche of people as well. So I think we are in a lot better position than we actually make out to be. But it doesn't immune us from further issues or global economic circumstances affecting us financially. As we've seen, the mining boom has really come to an end. Hopefully continue to tick along a little bit, but the question is whether the rest of the economy can take up the slack, and that's going to be the big question into the future. Why we are seeing record low interest rate is because we don't want to see the economy pull back any further.
Well, 2014 will be an interesting kettle of fish, and as we said at the beginning, I guess so hard to merely speculate as to what might happen in 2014, but there are a whole bunch of factors that affect the Australian economy and indeed our personal finances as it all flows through as to how Australia is coasting along. Well, Gavin Martin is from Cornerstone Wealth. You can find the Cornerstone Wealth website, just Google it, or you can get a link to it at our 2020 page at vision.org.au. And Gavin Martin, as a financial advisor, this is not meant to be a financial advice as such, and if you're making decisions, you should see a financial advisor to take your personal circumstances into consideration. Gavin, it's always a pleasure talking. Thanks so much for being with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. Great to be with you.